Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're heading down south to Cuenca, Ecuador.
Beautiful city.
It is, but we're not here for the usual tourist attractions.
Yeah.
No, we're going deeper.
Yeah.
We're diving into the city's history, its heart and soul, really.
That's right. We're talking about dusty archives, uh, delicate documents, whispers of stories from long ago.
That's a bit like a historical treasure hunt.
You could say that.
And what's our treasure map? What are we using to navigate these uncharted historical waters?
Our guide is a publication called the Boletín de Investigación Histórica del Austro.
Boletín de Investigación Histórica del Austro.
Okay, so maybe not exactly late reading for the beach, right?
Well, it's actually quite fascinating. Think of it like a detective's notebook, filled with clues about Cuenca's past. Specifically, it focuses on notaries and the records they kept.
Notaries. I have to admit, that doesn't exactly scream exciting adventure. I always pictured notaries as kind of, well, boring. Just glorified paper pushers. But that's where you'd be wrong. In colonial society, notaries were absolutely essential. They were responsible for recording everything, like property transactions, legal battles, wills and testaments, you name it, really all the critical stuff that forms a city's history.
Okay, I see. So they were more than just witnesses to signatures. They were like the keepers of the city's memory.
Precisely.
But you mentioned clues and a detective's notebook earlier. What's the mystery we're trying to solve here?
Well, Cuenca is obviously a city rich in history.
Right.
But it turns out piecing together a reliable picture of its past is a lot more complicated than you might think.
Really? I would have thought there would be tons of records.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But here's the thing. The bulletin points out that the earliest surviving records in Cuenca only go back to 1557.
1557. That's the year the city was founded.
Right. Exactly. But Columbus landed in the Americas way back in 1492.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty big gap. Over 60 years, in fact. So where are those early documents? Did they just poof, vanish into thin air?
That's the million-dollar question. Were they destroyed, lost, maybe even hidden away somewhere? It really makes you wonder if we're only seeing a partial picture of Cuenca's past. Like, what's missing? What don't we know?
60 years worth of history potentially lost? That's a huge chunk of time. What could possibly cause such a gap in the records?
Well, the bulletin paints a rather, shall we say, dramatic picture of the many challenges these archives have faced.
Okay, let's hear it. Give us the drama.
We're talking humidity, insects, fires, revolutions, you name it.
It's amazing anything survived at all. Sounds like something out of an Indiana Jones movie.
It really does. But sometimes the biggest threat to these historical records wasn't the elements. It was people.
What? You mean people deliberately destroying records?
Not always deliberately, but sometimes, yeah. There's this incredible story in the bulletin about a historian who borrowed, quote-unquote, a crucial volume of city council records.
What period are we talking about?
The records covered the years 1806 to 1811.
Whoa, talk about a pivotal time. That's right in the heart of Quito's independence movement.
Exactly, a key period, and this historian just borrowed them.
So what happened? Did he ever return them?
He did, but only after his death, thanks to a third party. Imagine the potential for bias in historical accounts because those records were missing for years, tucked away in someone's personal collection, maybe even shaping their interpretation of events. It really makes you think about the reliability of history as we know it, doesn't it?
It does make you wonder how many other documents are out there potentially influencing our understanding of history without us even realizing it. It's like trying to assemble a puzzle with half the pieces missing. So how does the bulletin address these challenges? What's their approach?
They're on a mission, really. They're trying to create a more reliable and verifiable historical record for Cuenca. How are they doing that? By publishing original source material.
Yeah.
Establishing the ground truth. And they're urging anyone who might have public documents lying around, not just notary records, but anything, letters, diaries, you name it, to consider donating them to the city archives.
That makes sense. The more pieces of the puzzle we have, the clearer the picture becomes. But why the focus on notaries? They still seem a bit, well, dry to me.
Well, remember how we talked about them being central figures in colonial society? Their records offer really unique insights into daily life, legal proceedings, social dynamics. We're not just talking about stuffy legal documents here. These were records of people's lives, their hopes, their struggles. The bulletin even includes examples of actual notary signs, those marks they use to authenticate documents.
Notary signs, like their signatures.
Sort of. Think of them as historical fingerprints, unique to each notary and carrying a lot of weight back then. They were a symbol of authority, signifying the legal validity of a document in a time when, well, most people couldn't even read or write.
So it's more than just a squiggle on a page. It's like a symbol of power and authenticity. And the bulletin actually shows us what these signs look like. That's pretty cool.
They do, and they show how they evolved over time, reflecting different artistic styles, even hinting at the personalities of the notaries themselves. Imagine, you're looking at a document from hundreds of years ago, and there's this unique mark, this visual connection to the person who created it. It's almost like they're reaching out through time.
Definitely cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It makes those notaries seem a lot less boring now.
Yeah.
So they were more than just record keepers. They were witnesses to history,
Ah.
literally leaving their mark on the events of their time. Makes you wonder what stories those marks could tell.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to explore next. Because these notary signs aren't just interesting visual artifacts, they hold clues about the notaries themselves, their role in society, and the often fascinating, sometimes shady world they operated in.
Okay, let's dive into these notary signs. I have to admit, I'm picturing something like a wax seal, all fancy and official.
Well, some of them were pretty elaborate, almost like little works of art. But these signos notariales, as they were called in Spanish, weren't just for show. They served a very real purpose, especially back then when most folks couldn't read or write.
Ah, so it was more than just a pretty picture then.
Exactly. It was all about authority. The notary's authority and the legal weight of the document itself. Think of it as their personalized stamp of authenticity.
A seal of approval, making sure everything was legit.
Precisely. And the bulletin emphasizes how seriously these notary appointments were taken. It wasn't just something anyone could get.
Oh, really? So how did one become a notary back then?
Often, the position was actually granted by the king himself, as a reward for service or something. Or sometimes it was through a bidding process.
Bidding. You mean like an auction for a government job?
It sounds strange now, but it highlights just how important this profession was in colonial society, and of course, how much power it held.
Right. Well, power always has a way of attracting those who want to use it for the wrong reasons.
Unfortunately, that's true. And the bulletin actually talks about this practice called traffic of notaries.
Traffic of notaries. What does that even mean?
Essentially, it meant that people would acquire notary positions not to actually serve the community, but for personal gain, to profit from it.
So not exactly upholding the integrity of the system then.
No, not really. They might sell the position, lease it out, or even pass it down through their family, whether the heir was qualified or not, ethical or not.
Wow, that's just wrong. It makes you wonder how many important documents might have been compromised because of this. The whole system was built on trust, but that trust was so easily exploited.
It's a reminder that even with safeguards in place, human nature, well, it finds a way, doesn't it?
It does. But hey, let's not dwell on the negatives. You mentioned that the bulletin includes some really interesting examples of these notary signs from different periods. Tell us more about those.
Oh, you see a wide variety. Some are really simple and straightforward. Others are incredibly elaborate, showcasing different artistic styles and influences over time. It's like a visual journey, really, showing how these marks evolved through the years. You can almost see the personality of the notary in some of them.
So each sign is like a window into the past, a little glimpse into the life of the person who created it. Makes those old documents feel a bit more human, doesn't it?
It does. History is more than just dates and events. It's about people and their stories. And the bulletin is really pushing for the preservation of those stories. Remember their call to action to donate any public documents?
Right, trying to piece together a fuller picture of Cuenca's past.
Exactly. And these notary signs, they're a crucial piece of that puzzle, helping us to understand the legal system of that time, the role of notaries, even the artistic trends.
Amazing how such a small thing, a little mark on a page, can tell us so much, isn't it? But for those of us who aren't, historians, why should we care about these notary signs and the stories they tell?
That's a great question. And I think there are a few takeaways here. First, it reminds us that history is all around us, hiding in plain sight. It could be an old document, a faded signature, an inscription on a building. We just have to look for it.
So we're all like amateur detectives in a way,
Yeah.
uncovering clues to the past everywhere we go.
Exactly. And second, it emphasizes just how important it is to preserve our shared heritage. These documents, these signs, they're not just pieces of paper. They're repositories of knowledge, experience, identity. They help us understand who we are and where we came from.
It's like we're holding a connection to the past, a link to the people who came before us.
Absolutely. And finally, it encourages us to be curious, to ask questions, to look beyond the surface. The bulletin, It challenges us to dig deeper, to look for different perspectives and recognize that history is constantly evolving, always changing.
So the next time I see something that seems ordinary, every day,
Yeah.
I'm going to stop and think, what's the story here? Who knows what secrets I might find?
That's the spirit. That's what makes history so exciting. It's full of surprises, and sometimes those surprises are hiding in the most unexpected places, like a squiggle on a centuries-old document.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, before we started this deep dive, I never would have thought I'd find notaries and their little squiggles so fascinating.
It's true, though. Once you start peeling back the layers, even the most ordinary things can become, well, captivating.
And you mentioned earlier peeling back layers. You mentioned that the bulletin is calling for the return of any public documents, the ones that might be in private hands. What's the reasoning behind that? Why is it so important to get these documents back to the archives?
Well, think back to what we were discussing about those missing years of records, in those early years of Cuenca's history. The bulletin suggests that there could be a ton of historical documents still out there, just tucked away, maybe in attics, basements, forgotten.
Wow, so some of those missing pieces of Cuenca's history could be just sitting in someone's house,
Yeah.
gathering dust.
It's possible. And it's not just about those early years either. The bulletin talks about how in the past, sometimes public documents were, neglected, even sold or auctioned off.
What? People actually sold off pieces of history. Why?
Well, back then, I guess they were just seen as old and dusty. People didn't understand, the importance of preserving them.
Thankfully, times have changed.
They have, as the bulletin points out, Ecuador eventually, enacted laws to protect these records.
When was that?
Starting in 1884. So it's a good thing those laws are in place now.
It is, but it still makes you wonder how much has been lost over the years because people just didn't realize what they had, didn't understand the value.
You're right. It is a sobering thought. And that's why the bulletin's message is so important. If you have public documents, any at all, consider giving them back to the city archives. It's where they belong.
It's a civic duty, really, isn't it? Making sure future generations have access to a complete and accurate record of the past.
It is.
Don't let history be held hostage.
Right, exactly. They need to be where everyone can see them, learn from them, appreciate them.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Cuenca's notarial history, what's the one thing you really hope our listeners take away from this?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It's alive. It shapes who we are today and who we'll become tomorrow.
And we all have a role to play in preserving it and understanding it.
Whether that's supporting our local archives, donating family documents, or just being curious, asking questions, digging a little deeper, we can all contribute to a richer, more accurate, and, well, more inclusive understanding of the past.
Maybe someone listening right now has a box of old papers tucked away in their attic. Who knows? Maybe they have the key to unlocking a forgotten chapter of Cuenca's history.
Wouldn't that be incredible?
It would. So listeners, if you come across any old documents about Cuenca, think about donating them. You might just hold a piece of history that's been waiting to be discovered.
And on that note, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of history.